So many of us are feeling burnt out. We feel like we are too busy. And at the same time, we feel like we need more self care in our lives. And we don't really know how to fit that in with our busy schedules. Well, what if I told you instead of trying to find time for a bubble bath or maybe find time to go to your local coffee shop, what if I told you instead, probably the best thing that you could do for yourself is to find something that you are actively doing with your hands and with your body in order to cultivate your life. Today, we're going to talk about why it's so important for you to have at least 5 hobbies or 5 interests in your life, and that is the best form of self-care. So I hope you'll join me today for the next episode of A More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. Welcome to A More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. We know that in the hectic hurry of everyday life, it's easy to lose sight of what really matters. This is a moment to pause and realign your focus on the one who gives us peace and rest. We're focusing on discipleship, productivity, and homemaking as we live with eternity in mind. This is the place where you'll learn to create a life you love and cultivate your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher. Thanks so much for joining me. Hey everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 11 of A More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. I'm your host, Casey Fletcher, and today we are talking about how to create a life you love. We've been going through a series about what it means to create a life you love, and today we're continuing that, and we're continuing that by talking about something that is so important, which is cultivating your life. I think a lot of times whenever we think about creating a life we love, we think about maybe our ideal version of our life. And we talked about that in the last episode in the series. In episode 9, we talked about how we really want to make sure that we are living biblically, that we are aligning our desires according to what the Bible says. And all of those things are important. But I think it's also important for us to recognize that we need to focus some of our efforts on cultivating our lives, which means that we cultivate our interests, that instead of getting stuck on the treadmill of life, that we pause and we think, okay, how can I do things in life that bring me pleasure and bring me joy? And in doing that, doing more things that you love to do, that is the way to create a life you love. And so we're going to be thinking about this, and we're going to be focusing specifically on hobbies and why you should have at least 5 hobbies. So you can think in your mind now, do I have 5 hobbies? If you're thinking, no, I don't think I do. Who has time for that? This is an episode for you, because I think this is a modern problem where most of us feel like we don't have time to focus on anything other than work and maybe our families, and that's it. But really, we're lacking something if that is the sum total of our lives. So we're going to be focusing on that today. Again, if you would like a guide to help you either create a life you love or to give you ideas of hobbies you want to try, you can check those out in the show notes below. And as always, if you haven't yet, please consider leaving a rating and review for the podcast. It helps others find the show. Make sure you're subscribed too, so that you can get the next episode in this series and in everything that we're doing on the podcast. So let's dive in. Today, I want us to think again about how we're cultivating our lives. And the reason why I started thinking about this is I had, one of those rare days. So I have 2 young kids, 4 and 2. I'm pregnant, so we have a baby on the way that's due in December. And so obviously life is busy and chaotic and loud. And one of the things that I had some time in the afternoon because my parents took the kids and they were watching them. And I said, okay, I'm not going to clean the house or focus on doing anything. I'm just going to have a minute to myself, get some self-care in. And so I sat there with my cup of coffee and I was thinking about all the things that maybe I could do. And I started looking around. I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do. You're so busy all the time that whenever all of the responsibilities that you normally have are kind of stripped from you, you feel like, okay, well, who am I without this work? You may not have young kids, or you might, not have that time where you feel like, oh, I need to be taking care of something around the house. But most of us, our lives are dictated by other people, by the responsibilities that we have. And again, it's like in vacation and those times where all of those responsibilities go on the back burner. what do you do during that time? I think a lot of times what we end up doing, and what I did this day, is, okay, I'm sitting there drinking my cup of coffee and the house is quiet and I'm trying to have some me time. And what do? It's probably the same thing you do. You pick up your phone, maybe you pick up the remote, you start scrolling, start watching TV, and before you know it, 2 hours have gone by, the kids are coming back, and you think to yourself, it's like, oh, I don't really feel any better for the time that I've spent doing whatever I've done, even though it was time by yourself, maybe self-care time. Is not really something that's cultivating your life, that's helping you to feel like you love your life. And so I really had to start thinking, okay, well, what do I want to fill my hours with? Besides the things that, I have to fill my hours with. Yes, I have to scrub toilets, and I have to, change diapers, and we cloth diapers, so I have to wash the diapers, and I have to make dinner, and I have to meal plan, I have to grocery shop. There's all these things that we have to do. You probably have a list of things that you have to do, whether it's around your house or for your job. But outside of all of those things, what are we filling our time with? And are those things worthwhile? We've talked a lot about technology on the podcast, especially in the last season. And as we talked about all of these things, the thing that we kept coming back to is this idea that technology is really just like this junk food that we fill ourselves up with, but it doesn't give us any nutritious value. It doesn't add anything of value to our lives or the people around us. And in doing this, it's something that really just detracts from our lives. It is the ultimate distraction. And so I had to ask myself, whenever I'm not all of these responsibilities, what am I? Who am I? And, what do I enjoy doing? What fascinates me? What makes me love my life? I think that busy seasons, they come and go, but even for the busiest person, this 24/7 pace, it finally catches up with you and you end up feeling burnt out. You feel like you don't know who you are. And I think this is where really that idea of a midlife crisis comes from, where you feel like you've spent all of your life chasing after these responsibilities, and you get to be 40 or 50 and you say, well, where am I at now? What have I done with my life? And there's worthwhile things, taking care of your house and your family, and, building up your bank balance so that you can retire at a reasonable age. All of those things are worthwhile. But you have to ask yourself, okay, whenever all of those responsibilities start to change and morph, what are you left with? I heard an older mother one time exhort younger women to make sure that they take time for themselves to develop who they are as a person. Because, in the season of spit up clothes where you're changing 4 diapers, 17 diapers, how many diapers a day, and you're constantly doing loads of laundry and you're constantly unloading your dishwasher, it can seem like, okay, well, I don't have time to develop this. But at some point, normally, faster than what we think, those kids are grown up and they leave the house and you're left saying, okay, who am I without these kids? And we can easily develop issues or habits that are not necessarily life-giving in those times because we feel like we've defined ourselves for so long by the responsibilities that we have. So when the kids are grown and flown, then who are you without them? And you might feel like you don't know. And I think a lot of times this is where that discontentment comes from. Whenever we think about people who, their kids have left and maybe they start getting unhappy in their marriage, or they feel like their whole life they've been robbed of something, they don't feel fulfilled. This is the thing that we need to think, okay, how can we not get to that point? Well, we need to cultivate our lives now. And I think one of the greatest ways to do that is with these hobbies, with these interests that are outside of the responsibilities that we have, but cultivate our hearts and our lives, and they end up helping other people. So in our 5 ways to cultivate a life you love, so the last podcast that we did in this series, so episode 9, we talked about how we needed to work in rhythms and routines that make our hearts sing, that give us joy. If we want to create a lovely life, it makes sense that we need to add some things into our life that we love doing. And so many of us would call these simple things that we love doing. There are things like sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee, or, going on a walk in the woods that are not necessarily hobbies, but they're just activities that you do. But most of us would call these hobbies that we do, these habits that are routines that we enjoy doing, we would call them hobbies. And basically, according to Google, hobbies are things that are done regularly in one's leisure time for pleasure. Sounds like something that you would want to do to create a life you love. But I think that most of us just simply, we don't know what we love. If we think about as children, our lives are dictated by the system that we're in. So if you are a public school kid, you wake up in the morning. I hear the bus come by at 6:30 in the morning to pick up these kids. It's still dark outside. They go. Then the bus comes and drops them back off around 4:30. So all day they've been at school. And most, a big percentage of kids, they stay longer than whenever the bus comes and drops them off, and they do sports. Maybe they don't get done with their sports until 5:30, 6:30. And then they have, a few hours of homework that they need to do. They need to eat, get cleaned up. And then they go to bed. And the next day, they do the same thing. And so I think most people, whenever they think about their lives as kids, you didn't really have time to cultivate those hobbies. Now, as a kid myself, I was kind of in some of those things, but I didn't do sports. And so because of that, I was able to kind of pursue other interests. And so I did guitar and I played piano and I did other things like that. And that was good, that time in the afternoons, just to cultivate that one thing and dive deep. But I think, most of us, we don't really have the space in our schedule to pursue these things that we love to do, or even try out things to figure out what we love to do. You're just told, hey, you got to go to school, and then, hey, you're going to do this sport, and then that's it. Then adulthood comes. And in college, you may get into some clubs and things, but people, for the most part, their lives are school, work, and then, making friends and spending time that way. And so really in college, you're not cultivating these things. And then adulthood, nobody has time for it. And so your whole life, you've gone through each stage, not really trying to figure out what you love to do or who you are as a person. And so I think this is a new problem. The modern supply chain makes it to where we don't have to learn how to do these skills or these things with our hands, these common arts. Instead, we can, go to the store and buy whatever we need. We don't have to sew quilts anymore to keep us warm in the wintertime. Most of us are never cold in the wintertime because we always have our heat on. But then if we needed a blanket, we would go to the store and buy one for cheaper than you could ever make it. And it would be, more cost effective and more effective use of your time, I guess. Gardening is the same way, where you can go to the store and generally you can buy something for cheaper than if you grew it yourself, unless you're really good at gardening and you're, growing in bulk and preserving things. And so because of this, we don't have to pursue these hobbies. Before this industrial era that we're in now, this modern era, before they had to do these things just for survival. But now we don't. And because of these, whenever we try to pick up something and learn how to do it, then it almost feels like, you're doing something and maybe you're trying to sew or trying to crochet or trying to do something like maybe woodworking or something like that. And you make something and you look at it and you just laugh. If you've ever been to like one of those pottery classes or painting classes and you're not somebody who has done that before, you know what I mean, where you do something and you're like, wow, this is just so bad. And the reason why is because you don't have those skills. I always say it's like some of the things that we did. I was doing a craft with my son and I was like, this looks like a 5-year-old did this. I was making like a cape. I was trying to sew a cape. I don't really know how to sew. And so whenever I made it, I was like, it looks like my son did it. And then the thing is like, it really is, because you have probably the same expertise as a 5-year-old. Yes, you might have more, fine motor skills, but the amount of time that you've spent learning a skill is probably the same as your child who's much younger than you. We don't have the time invested in all of these hobbies, and we want to jump into it, whether it's baking or sewing or gardening, like we've been doing it since we were 5 years old or 10 years old. But we haven't. And so because of that, we're not going to have the same level of expertise. It's going to take time and effort to get to that point. So that can be kind of demoralizing. So many people, they feel like, oh, hobbies, they're not for me because it's more effective, both monetarily and with your time, to just go buy the thing from the store. And then the same thing where you feel kind of like, and if I did it, buying from the store, a machine is making it and it's a much better, it looks better than if I was making it myself. And so it just doesn't seem like hobbies are that essential. If people in the past didn't, ferment their vegetables or brew their own beer or sew their own dress or knit their own socks, they just wouldn't have anything to wear or eat or drink. And it would be almost a thing of laziness because they're not doing the work that they need to do in order to provide for themselves. But now we can go to the store and buy all of those things for probably less than $50. And so I think, all of these things that we do, it's like, why should we cultivate these hobbies in our life whenever it just seems like they can detract us from, maybe our jobs? And they might be, a way to waste money or time. Well, this is why hobbies are so important. One, hobbies can improve your mental and physical health and life satisfaction. So basically, they make for a better life all around. According to Harvard Health, there was a study published online in September 11th, 2023, and it suggests that having a hobby is good for your health, mood, and more. Compared to people who didn't have hobbies, those who did reported better health, more happiness, fewer symptoms of depression, and higher life satisfaction. So again, it just is a meaningful life is one that includes hobbies. Hobbies also help to fight against workplace idolatry and performance-related issues. I was just listening to a podcast. It was with the author of a book who wrote a book on toxic masculinity. And one of the things that she was saying is basically once men left the home and went into the workplace, they often started to idolize the workplace because, for a millennia, people were always at home. They were farmers. And so men worked at home with the family and they were more present at home. And then it wasn't until really the industrial era where they went to go work in the factories that, one, they were away from the home and the family and all of that, but then also that they started to idolize their jobs. Their jobs became more important than their family, their homes, or their faith. So having hobbies, it helps to fight against those things because it shows you that your productivity isn't aligned with your paycheck or what you can do for your employer. Instead, it helps to fight against some of those performance-related issues. You're doing the thing for that satisfaction of just accomplishing it, of doing something because you love doing it. Hobbies also are the best mode of soul care. So I think self-care often, we had a podcast on this in the last season, but self-care often prioritizes kind of just consuming. So we say self-care is like getting in a bubble bath, maybe buying something, maybe getting some new clothes, going shopping, getting your nails done. That's self-care. But really, we don't want to just be consuming things. We want to be producing things. And often whenever we produce something with our hands or move our bodies, so exercise, those kinds of things, whenever we are working, we actually get more satisfaction than if we just, laid on the couch and scrolled on our phone. So I think it's the best mode of self-care whenever we are participating in hobbies. And then they also help you to cultivate your unique identity and gifts while being a blessing to others. We all know the person who has focused on the hobby of playing an instrument, like a guitar or bass or something like that. And because of the time that they spent playing guitar, they're able to then go and lead worship at church. And so everybody knows who they are because they're the ones that are asked to lead worship. And that's just one example of somebody who spent the time to cultivate a hobby, and that hobby becomes a ministry and blessing to other people. It's the same thing with somebody who loves to bake or somebody who's artistic. Those people, you end up knowing, oh, this is a person who can do this stuff, and then you ask them, and then they're able to contribute a ministry to other people. So I think hobbies, they're a way to find pleasure in our lives and find pleasure in God. But obviously, we always have to have that recognition that hobbies can become an idol. If you love to play golf and golf is like your life, and then you say, well, instead of going to church, I'd like to play golf 2 times a week instead of just on Saturdays. And then that kind of takes over your life, then that hobby has become an idol. So what you have to ask yourself, John Piper recommends asking yourself, does your hobby cause your heart to exalt God or the world? So is the hobby that you're pursuing, does it make you fall more in love with God? Or is it making you think about how you can be more a part of the world? Does it refresh you? Does it point others to Christ? So if you can say, yes, it's helping me to exalt God, it is refreshing me, and it's helping to point others to Christ, I'm using it for that way as a ministry, then the hobby can be something that is very life-giving, but then it's also something that is God glorifying. So I think all of these reasons are why hobbies are important. And we talked about why people feel kind of conflicted about trying to pursue hobbies. But then I think something that's even more important to think about is also, the example that we're setting for our kids. There is a lady her name is Melanie Hempy, and she's the founder of Screen Strong. So if you want to have any resources to help you navigate how to deal with technology and your kids, Screen Strong is a great resource for that. But one of the things that she uses as kind of a litmus test for kids, she's talking with a kid. She wants to know, okay, are they addicted to technology? Are they struggling with this thing? Especially thinking about video games and social media. What she asked them is, can you name 5 hobbies that you have outside of screens? And just wait for a response. And again, if I asked you that, can you name 5 hobbies? Could you do that? She always can tell which parents have good boundaries for their kids about screens if they can rattle off their interests. If they can say, yeah, I play piano and I draw and I play on the sports team and I garden and I knit. If they can do that, then they have all of that. She can tell that they haven't just spent their lives on their phones, because to be able to have all those interests, you have to have time to cultivate those interests. And so their life is not being just subsumed by their phone. But kids who spend time on their phones or watching TV for hours and hours and hours, often they kind of struggle to come up with one thing other than, oh, I like to watch this show, or, oh, I, look at this person on Instagram. And that becomes the person that they are, because, who you are is how you spend your time. Their life is their phone. And so I think it's an important question to ask the young people around you, like your kids or your nieces and nephews or people at your church. But also I think it's important to ask yourself that question. Can you name 5 things that you enjoy doing outside of your phone? And yeah, your family and your job is going to take up a big portion of that time, but people are spending, 4, 5, 6 hours of screen time on their phones. And so in doing that, you can kind of see how it's like, okay, you say that your whole life is your work and your family, and so you don't have time to cultivate these interests. But the actuality of it is you're looking at your phone as like a part-time job. And so you need to make sure that you think very, very critically and be self-aware about where you're at as far as these hobbies go. So the question is, what would your 5 hobbies be? I think if we think about the number 5, one, it can just, to have 5 hobbies, it's a well-rounded person who has lots of interests. But then also I think these 5 hobbies, I'm going to give you some recommendations for some categories of these hobbies so that you can think about how you can become that well-rounded person if maybe you're struggling right now with thinking of one hobby that you're interested in. Messi Frankfurt and Kat Kalimani, they both have different recommendations 5 categories of hobbies, but all of these come from the 5 hobbies rule, which according to Alyssa Tabet means that you should have 5 hobbies that serve different purposes. And these categories for the 5 hobbies, they can change, but I'm going to give you some recommendations, and this is something that can help to kind of guide your brainstorming as you think about what you would want these 5 hobbies to be to start cultivating those in your life. So the first hobby is one that can make you money. So this would be a hobby outside of your day job. So this is not a workplace thing. Instead, this would be something that you're doing as kind of like a side hustle, or something that you're doing that it's maybe not a business right now, but it's something that you enjoy doing that you can make a little bit of money on the side. So an example of this could be blogging, social media, photography, personal finance stuff, couponing, crafting, and maybe selling those things at Etsy or maybe at a craft show, sewing, alterations, woodworking, handyman repairs. All of these things can help you to cultivate a hobby, and then you feel like you're getting, kind of doubly rewarded for it, because one, you get the satisfaction of doing that thing, but then you also get to make some money off of it. So even like gardening can be one of those things. Like if you are growing lots of produce and then you're able to sell it on Facebook Marketplace or a little roadside market, that's a way where you feel like it's a win-win. So I think the first hobby could be one that makes you money. This would probably be one that you've been doing for a while, I would think, because you would need that expertise. But for me, blogging and doing this podcast is a way that I cultivate this hobby. Then the next hobby is one that helps your bodies and your health. So, sports and easy access to gym facilities, it makes your teenage and college years really easy to kind of stay fit. But a lot of times people, once they don't have those structures, they just kind of they throw their hands up in the air and they're like, I don't know how to continue to exercise. You have people who will make time to go to the gym, but it's something that it's always like a struggle of how can I get back on this routine? And then something comes up and then you don't do it. And then you're like, okay, I need to get back on this routine. And so a hobby can help you to not have that, January 1st mentality where you do something for 2 weeks and then you're like, okay, well, that one's failed. That resolution is going in the trash and then I'll try again next year. Instead, if you have a hobby, it's something that one, you enjoy doing, but it also, again, keeps you fit. So an example of this could be hiking, swimming, rowing. Pickleball is a great example that's popular right now. Other group adult sports like softball or baseball, volleyball. Disc golf is one. Yoga, running is particularly if you're training for a race, if you have like a running group. Rucking is popular, which is hiking with backpack, and biking. So all of these are different ways that you could cultivate a hobby that you enjoy that also helps you stay fit. And I think a lot of times we just get so hung up on the fact that we need to do this exercise and it becomes a have to kind of thing that we never really think about, okay, well, how can I make this something that I enjoy so that I want to do it? So your next hobby would be one that cultivates your physical health. Then the next one, number 3, is a hobby that helps us connect with your family and others. So oftentimes I think we think of hobbies, just like self-care, as something we have to do on our own. So we go off and we, do this very kind of like isolated thing that's just for us, that's our thing. And I think that's fine for some creative pursuits maybe. But I also think that we are missing out if we just try to make our hobbies just about what we like to do. I think it's important for us to try to connect with our families or others, maybe your spouse, and try to cultivate something that's an interest that both of you guys have. And then that becomes something that you do together with them. A lot of people, they have maybe a show that every week, whenever it comes on, they watch this show with this one person, whether it's your spouse or somebody else. And that over time, that is a bonding thing that kind of brings you closer. Well, you can do the same thing with hobbies. So you could do any of the health and fitness hobbies listed above. Fishing or hunting could be something that you do. Camping, pinball. These could be things, maybe not with a spouse, but it could be even things that you like to do with friends, that you start a club or you join something and it helps you to connect with other people. Board games could be something that you do as a family. Homesteading, livestock could be something that you do to connect with others. Book clubs, cooking and baking. But really, you could do just about anything. I've even heard of people, that have like a little sewing group where they learn how to sew together. And so they bring their sewing machines, they go to like a church or some other kind of bigger facility, and they connect with people that way. If you've ever done a paint and pour where you paint a picture while you're, hanging out with your friends and having a drink, that is an example of doing a hobby, but you could do something like that without necessarily going someplace and spending, $50 or whatever it is. You could do those things just to connect with them at your house. You could rotate houses and then cultivate that hobby together. So it's a great way to, again, connect with maybe your family. If you did a sport, a lot of people, they connect with their kids over their sports that they're interested in. But it's something that you guys could find something to participate in all together. And that could be a great way to build those connections while also providing that the benefits that hobbies bring. It's also good to have one hobby that makes you creative and kind of exercises those, creative juices. I think because of screens, many of us, we're consuming people's content without ever creating content of our own or producing anything creative ourselves. And just like if we ate too much and we never exercise, we feel kind of sluggish. I think many of us feel kind of mentally sluggish because we're consuming so much without ever producing anything. So these hobbies are probably what you think of whenever you think of a hobby, all of these creative ones. But you really could just find something. I think the sky's the limit with this one. And it's something that you're doing just for yourself. Now, it could be something that over time you begin to do it so much that you could sell it. And, then you have these hobbies where some of them could be basically all five. I don't know if knitting is exercise, but, you could say, oh, I knit with my friends and then I sell my stuff. And then this is what I feel creative doing. And so, you can see how you start to, once you cultivate a hobby, it can fulfill different needs that you have. But some examples of this could be knitting, crocheting, painting and watercolors, nature journaling, sewing, quilting, woodworking, gardening, baking, canning and preserving foods, writing, photography, learning an instrument. These are all things that are good and they help to create, help us to feel more creative. Then our last category is a hobby that helps us to grow spiritually and intellectually. So, in a 2024 study, half of U.S. adult respondents said that they hadn't read a single book in the past year. And so I think many people, we've seen kind of the demise of reading since, Neil Postman, he wrote his book, I think that was in the 80s. And he basically was saying, look, TV, we're amusing ourselves to death. And now, reading is dead. And then we had the book, The Shallows. We've talked about these before. That came out that he also talked about, it's gotten even worse with social media and the internet than even what it was with TV. And we just see, this demise of attention spans, but then that's also leading to the fact that people just don't read books anymore. And so I think many people feel like watching reels and shorts on YouTube, it qualifies as like, okay, this is a well-read education. Like I know about things, I'm informed about what's going on in the world, and I don't need anything that these books can tell me. The average amount of times even spent reading like a blog is 52 seconds, which, the post that I'm reading right now, it's on the blog. And so I'm using that as I'm, doing this podcast, and I'm almost finished with it, and it's been 30 minutes. So people are taking content that's, 20-minute read, or maybe a little bit less than that, and they're reading it in 52 seconds. So you're not really getting much out of this. I think this is something that we're just going to see more and more. And really what that's going to lead to is just a shallow understanding of life and what's good, true, and beautiful. It'll result in people that have, less critical thinking skills, and they just won't have the joy that comes from some of this knowledge that they could have. And so I think that you need to cultivate your reading life. And we have a couple posts on the blog that you can read about how to do that. Charlotte Mason calls this mother culture, where basically you're cultivating these hobbies. So it could be like a handicraft, like crocheting, but it's also cultivating your life by reading books and pursuing knowledge that you're interested in, by pursuing what is beautiful in life. And it helps you to continue on your education. I think that we all need to cultivate these hobbies in our life. For me, it's definitely reading. I, read a lot. And so I try to always have a book. So that way, if I am sitting in the living room or something, or even by my bed, I have books strewn all over the house. That way, whenever I have those spare moments, I have the option where I don't have to turn to my phone. Instead, I can look at a book instead. So I think reading can be one, journaling can be one, nature journaling, blogging. So if you feel kind of silly writing a journal just for yourself, if you blog and you publish it, it's a way of, maybe you're not going to be as personal with it, but it helps you to kind of think about your thoughts. I heard somebody say that if you want to become a master of a certain content, if you're interested in it, best thing to do is start a blog. And basically with a blog, you are researching content and then writing about it and then posting it and finding new topics within that content to write about. And so it helps you just to dive deeply in your interests, and it helps to structure what you're thinking. Bible journaling could also be one of those things. So, like I said, we want to have 5 hobbies that help us to be well-rounded and to pursue different types of things. And so some of these hobbies are 1, a hobby that can make you money. 2, a hobby that helps your body and your health. 3, a hobby that helps to connect with your families and with others. 4, a hobby that makes you creative. And 5, a hobby that helps you to grow spiritually and intellectually. So once you have picked your hobbies, again, I wouldn't recommend picking all of these all at once. Maybe there's something that you have always enjoyed doing, and or something that you've been doing, with your church, or it's something that you kind of feel like, okay, I'm solid on this thing. And so because you already have that hobby and a system for that hobby, then you can move on to the next one. If you feel like right now, you're kind of building up from one hobby and you want to get to 5 hobbies, then that could be something that you just start adding one at a time. So first you want to make the time for that thing. Some of this could be dictated for you. So like our church, right now they're doing pickleball, they do sports and things like that. And so that time is something that if you said, oh, I want to get into this hobby, and you have a system like your church plays pickleball, or maybe there's a sewing class that you could join, you would say, okay, I'm going to schedule off this time in my life. You also, if you are not going to do something organized like that, just say, okay, on Saturday mornings, I'm going to give myself a couple hours to focus on this hobby and cultivating that thing. And then just take it slow. Once you take the time to do it, I would focus on the basics first. So I would find a blog or a podcast, a YouTube channel, a book that helps to acquaint you with the basics of what you're doing. I would probably look at some of it before you go out and buy the stuff or anything like that. Just try to figure out what you need to know, so that whenever you go to sit down and do your hobby, you kind of have a game plan for what you're going to do. Then I would gather up your supplies, maybe order it on Amazon or go to the store, and then you just got to stay consistent. There was a book that I got, one of the hobbies that I want to learn that, as I mentioned before, I don't really know how to do, is sewing. And so I got a book, and it was structured like a class. So it has 12 projects, and the idea is you do it over 12 months. So by the end of the year, you've really made some quality pieces, but you could do it Like basically block off one day a month where you focus on that thing. And so that consistency is really where you're going to see the biggest gains. It's not, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to spend a whole week sewing as much as possible. If you do that, you'll probably get burned out, and then you'll look at what you made and you're like, this is no good. Instead, just say, okay, I'm going to try to do one new thing each month and try to cultivate this. Then the more time that you spend in it, the easier the next projects will be. So I hope that this has given you some encouragement to learn your hobbies, what they are, what you would like them to be. Maybe you need to brainstorm a list of what you are interested in to start to learn what you like to do as a person, what you love. And then I hope that you begin to cultivate these hobbies in your life to help you create a life you love. Like I said, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. Our next episode will be a continuation of our systematic theology study series. Until then, keep creating a life you love and cultivating your heart for God. Bye. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of a More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. If you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts to help others find the show. While you're there, you can like and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out the blog and our store for more encouragement and resources on how to create a life you love and cultivate your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher, and I'll see you next week.